Hello, my name is Jaimine, and I'll be working with Makers Academy this upcoming Thanksgiving and winter. And I'll be leading the SAT reading, writing, and essay program. So I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself, and I'd like to introduce the program as well a little bit. So, without further ado, about me. Now, I put this in here because, well, people put in their qualifications, but to be honest with you, I'm going to begin by saying that I honestly don't think this is that important. But many Korean parents are concerned about what kind of qualifications does this person have based on their schooling and experiences. I think it's valid to a certain extent, but on the next slide, I'll explain what I think is most important, but very quickly. I studied psychology at UC Berkeley. Go Bears! I loved Berkeley. And I graduated with highest honors, received my bachelor's, and I went straight into graduate studies in clinical psychology. I was accepted into the PhD program in clinical psychology at UCLA, which was at the time the #1 program in the world. Now, I didn't complete the program. Why? I received my master's in 1 year, and I stayed there for a few years after, but I realized that what I loved doing most was teaching. I taught psychology courses there in front of students of 200 to 300 people. I also taught small classrooms of 5 to 6, teaching psychology or research writing skills. And I enjoyed that experience so much that I decided that a life in academia, being a professor, means doing research rather than teaching. That's not for me. What I'd really like to do is spend more time with students. So I came to Korea, and since then, on and off, I've been teaching, but a total of time that I spent teaching has been 11 years in the SAT, SSAT, college essays, and AP psychology. So this is my passion. It's not just a job for me, but this is my passion. Now, about me really, okay? So what do I think you should choose your SAT instructor based on? Yes, results, okay? The test score is important. My goal is to make sure that you get that target score that you want. But also, just as important, I do think the SAT has something to teach us beyond just that test score. I do believe that in studying for the SAT that you can exercise skills that you will need for other things that you will do in school. So, my classes are about personal and academic development beyond just the SAT. Second of all, integrity. I'm sure you all heard about the problems in the SAT industry right now. I want you to earn your score. I want you to know what it's like to work really hard for that score and know that score is yours. So my classes are about integrity as well, and efficiency. In high school, I studied really hard. I spent a lot more time, to be honest with you, studying in high school than I did in college, okay? But my results were better in college. Why? Because I was more efficient. I was smarter with how I studied and when I studied. So once I got into college, I started learning about the theories of education, the theories of learning, the theories of cognition. So my classes are built around this concept that you shouldn't be spending 10 hours studying when you could be doing the same thing in a single hour. So we're maximizing the time that we have together. Now, let's talk about the reading, because I'm sure that many of you are dismissive about the writing and the essay section, all right? Perhaps justifiably so. But in terms of the reading, I believe that there are 3 key components to success. 1, there's comprehension, okay? So you need to comprehend, you need to understand at a basic level the sections that are important in the reading passage in order for you to solve these problems. How do we get there? First, we need to make sure our vocabulary is solid. And 2, we need to make sure that we have some of the basic concepts that show up over and over again in these reading passages. For example, especially with the science passages, there are concepts related to statistics. It'll help you if you know those things a little bit. With the experimental method, same thing, a little bit. If you have a basic familiarity with these concepts that show up over and over again, you'll have a leg up on the comprehension. So vocabulary and the understanding of basic concepts that show up in the reading passages. 2, where do we go from comprehension? Comprehension is an important component in order to go to analysis. Now, how do we do good analysis? How do we make sure that we do analysis that leads us to the correct answers? Well, first of all, evidence. You always want to go back to the passage and find the evidence. And 2, this isn't like the SSAT or the TOEFL where you basically regurgitate. You can find the answers almost immediately, almost word for word verbatim in the passage. There are very few questions like that on the SAT. Instead, you've got to be flexible. You need to be able to digest the information that you're getting and play around with it just a little bit. And 3, time management. This is a huge one, even for people who are near native speakers. You need to be selective in your reading. All right, so you need to be sure that you focus and read thoroughly the parts that are relevant and skim through the rest that aren't as relevant. And you'll find that comes from the question clues. Let's take a look a little bit more in detail now. In terms of vocabulary, I prepared a vocabulary list that's based on the principle of generalizability versus specificity. We want words that are more likely to show up in multiple passages. So I avoided including words that are passage or very specific topics, okay? We don't want those words, such as scientific method. I mentioned it before, okay? I've included words that show up often when it comes to experimental research. And ye old English, some of you might be familiar with the word suffer as, oh, I'm suffering so much right now, I'm in pain. Well, some of you might know this already, but in Old English, in the constitutional documents, we should know that suffer means to permit. So those types of words I've prepared. I focus on literal and figurative meaning both for these definitions, right? If we say, I'm going to hammer this point in, it doesn't mean literally take a hammer and nail it in, but it means repetition, right? And brute force. And lastly, I believe that vocabulary study is about integration rather than memorization. Again, the SAT is not just about regurgitation, it's really about digestion. Okay? Now, analysis. As I said before, digestion over regurgitation. We're going to have to be flexible. Okay, we're going to have to really use the evidence to engage in objective analysis. I know that some of you might say that there's no such thing as completely objective analysis on reading. I agree. But as much as possible, we want to avoid our own thinking and engage in evidence-based thinking and analysis. Now, this is where I'm going to touch the topics of writing an essay. Most of you are dismissive about these two sections because you're saying reading is the biggest problem. I agree. It's hardest to improve your scores on reading. But writing and the essay, working on these and studying these effectively, efficiently, correctly, properly, is how you can also improve your reading skills as well too. For example, in the writing, you might notice that it's not just about grammar, but it's about content a lot of the times. And what are the relationships between certain sentences or parts of sentences? And there are questions on main idea and supporting details. And of course, this is all stuff that we do for the reading passages as well. And the essay, the why and the how, you know that you need to analyze the passage, and a proper analysis of the passage means that we look at why does the author use this word? How is it persuasive? These are types of questions that will also present themselves in the reading section as well. So, time, really quickly. You have 5 passages, 65 minutes. That's a total of 13 minutes. That does not include time for reading. That's just time given for you to solve the problems. Okay? So they're expecting you to be able to do the reading in addition to all that. Is that possible? I know you can't see this. That's fine. I'm just showing you, wow, look at that. There's a whole page of passage and there's 2 pages of questions, about 10 of them. How can I do that in 13 minutes? It's hard. But now look at this. You don't need to be able to read it, but there are 74 lines in this passage. But the necessary lines, out of the 10 questions, they only look at 16 lines. How can we find this? Okay. How do we get to these locations? The questions provide the clues. Some of you know that some of the questions have line references explicitly stated on there. Those are obvious. Now, how do we find these locations when the line references aren't provided explicitly? Well, some of you learned that for TOEFL and SSAT, I should look for keywords and go back to the passage. Not a bad idea. We're going to expand upon that. We go from keywords to key concepts. Remember what I said. SAT is no longer about regurgitation. It's not just going to be one for one. You need to be able to expand upon what they're asking you to look for in the questions. So we're going to work on translating key terms into key concepts. And believe it or not, this seems so basic, but the order in which you do the questions, that will actually help reveal the locations of the clues for these questions as well too. Now, as I said, questions to passage, we go from the questions to solving the passage. Now, this actually requires a great amount of an analytical skill. That's why we focus on developing analytical skills in our class. Now, as I'm finishing up here, I'd like to ask you, this is the most important ingredient. I know that I mentioned the 3 components for reading, but overall, in terms of, are you going to get something out of taking this class with me? I believe that this is what you need to ask yourself. Do you have a desire for education beyond just the test score? Yes, you want that test score, but do you want to learn beyond that as well too? Do you want to earn that score with integrity? And would you like to work efficiently? If that's true, I think we have something together that might combine for a successful outcome. So some details. We have online and offline classes available for those of you who are staying home, for those of you who prefer to come to the Academy. We have times for students in the US and students in Korea. And for the December SAT, we have Thanksgiving intensives. And for the March SAT, we have intensives during winter break. The schedule is available on http://makersmark.kr. So if you visit, you can get the specific details there. Thank you so much for your time and consideration, and I hope to see all of you soon. Thank you.